Um, Good morning to everybody and welcome to our session. We've got an hour with you, which is pretty much a tough space for a gig to fill. So we've got about 20 numbers in our playlist. But to join me, I've got this group of people who I'll introduce in a minute. But just so that you know who we are, because that's a pretty good place to start. I'm Tony Sedgwick. What would I declare? I'm really a drug hunter. I love developing and taking drugs through from idea to the end. But nowadays I'm a people person, spending most of my time in executive search with Natalie from Verdis Group, but also just getting people to live in this turbulent times that we're living in. So that's pretty much what I am about. We've got an hour, and we've got something to chew on, and I'll explain and maybe give you some starting points on that in a minute. But maybe I'll introduce my learned friends here. I've briefed each one of them not to be boring. I've briefed each one of them that they need to be engaging, so our job is to try and talk to you and get you involved. And if we don't get any questions, I'll pick on people. And I've got some people in my sights already. And we're going to chew over something which I think is very interesting. I'll come back in a minute. But I want them to introduce themselves and just say one word. I don't want War and Peace, guys. I just want sort of something brief, which is to the point. But then a word at the end that really sums up your life at the moment in professional terms. I don't want to hear about your private life, but maybe that could be more interesting. But I want to hear about a word just that explains what it is about your professional life, and maybe I'd just start with the word I'd say at the moment is mad. So much stuff out there. And I'll pass you on to introduce yourself briefly and say the word that describes your professional life. Tony.
Great, thank you. My name is Tony Fougerolles. I'm CEO of Evox, Therapeutics. We're based in Oxford. We're working on exosomes to basically get drugs to places they can't get to otherwise. Just in terms of background, before being CEO, I was CSO of a range of different companies in Belgium with Ablink, and then about 15, 20 years in Boston biotech at Moderna, and then before that at Alnylam. And in terms of how I'd sum stuff up, I've always been attracted to doing transformational things, and so trying to work in those 3-4 examples, platforms that can really be transformative. So not a one drug per se, but if it can work, you can get multiple drugs.
And a word that describes your professional life?
Probably transformative, being focused on things, the big problems.
Really good, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, so my name's Tauhid Ali. I work for Takeda. I'm based in London, and I head up a group called the TAK-celerator. We are a small team that focuses on rare diseases, and our business model, we believe, is slightly unique in that our model is to take early stage assets and pursue them through a translational plan to an inflection point, which can either be early preclinical proof of concept or clinical proof of concept. And then we take a biotech mindset, so we operate outside of the Takeda infrastructures with an external environment. We then create new cos around those assets, and we work very closely with a number of venture capital firms. The second thing we might do is, if there's a reason to believe for that asset around a rare disease or a cluster, we might bring it back into one of our existing therapy area units. And the third one is we collaborate with a number of rare disease companies. We have a strategic collaboration with Ultragenyx. Clearly, as a small rare disease group, we will go through a lot of change. And the one word that would maybe sum up my life at the moment is integration, because if you know Takeda, we're going through a massive acquisition of a small rare disease company called Shire.
Okay. Thank you very much. Stuart.
It's good it's integration, not disintegration. So Stuart Dollow, I'm the founder of a small consultancy called Vermilion Life Sciences, mainly focused on late phase medicines development, but predominantly thinking about how the early phase actually should be impacted by understanding what the access needs for patients are. So thinking about early ways of getting medicines to patients, and then thinking more as drug development as an iterative concept. I also have sort of an interesting portfolio. So as well as consulting with companies, I chair a government committee. I sit on the board of the Human Tissue Authority and also of the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine. So, and in my career, I'm not sure it's a career, it may be in my journey, I've covered multiple different areas of the industry and of governance. I think, Tony, my word is probably juggling at the moment.
Juggling. Okay. Next one, my friend Phil.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Phil Lewillier. I head up business development for MSD, and my team covers Europe and the Middle East. We're effectively a small team looking for pipeline that we can bring in through partnerships or acquisitions into the MSD pipeline. I've been in MSD about 16 months now, and prior to that I was in Cancer Research Technology, part of Cancer Research UK. I've spent most of my career selling into pharma, so to speak, and now I've changed sides, poacher come gamekeeper in some ways. I'm closely connected to Fiona Marshall. You might have seen us announce it end of last year, early this year. We're setting up a discovery centre in London, perhaps one of the few examples of bringing research this way rather than going the other way as a pharma company. We've got 20 people on the ground now at Elbeck, and we'll grow to something like 150 in our discovery centre over the next few years. My word is gamekeeper now.
So, I mean, we've been asked to chew over, I think what Chris said was, what our question is what's going on in the pharma biotech sector? Is it really any more a pharma biotech sector? Where does cell therapy fit in? Is that what we would think of as pharma? And I think the opening gambit was that with companies a couple of 100 years old, and what's going on that's good? What do we think about? And I suppose as a provocative statement, what intrigues me is yesterday I heard the word disruption used at least 65 times I counted it. And so what I'm very intrigued by is the word disruption. I'm very intrigued by, if it's so overused, it's now become to a point that almost research is disruption, and that can't be so there's got to be something. And the question I've posed to the panel to maybe chew over is this phenomenon of herding that I see. So I really see the herd phenomenon. I mean, there's almost a bell-shaped curve that says that poor ideas clearly don't get looked at. Then you've got the middle ground, which is most of the ideas we have, and then you've got the fab ideas, where everybody's running to, and everybody's running to those ideas as a pack. So if you're not in, immuno-oncology, or if you're not trending, really, that's what they call it with the, Nigel, the trending on the Twitter, you don't know that, but the trending, if you're not trending, you're not really it. And I see that in the behavior of big pharma, because they don't want to necessarily take a risk, because, my goodness, we're going to do something different. I see it in the behavior of investors who say, well, we're going to put a big lump of money top down, we're going to follow a zeitgeist, we're going to put a management team together that's stellar, and then actually we're going to look for the trending technology, put money around it. And I suppose there's nothing wrong with all of that, but what about differences, and where are the new trends, or is it always going to be heard? And I throw it to my four august friends to maybe start rattling that around. Tony?
Yeah, no, so, as we talked about, the whole herd mentality, I mean, you can see, as you mentioned, a few topics were kind of immuno-oncology, huge breakthroughs, but yet, there comes a point at which people continue to pile on. And so the question is that the best use of being the 40th or 50th person in that particular field? I think if you have a really competitive edge or a new way to look at it, then it makes all the sense in the world. But if you don't, then you're going to have real kind of trouble trying to kind of differentiate yourself. But you can see why that happens, because people, if they're investing, want something in that space in their portfolio, and vice versa. The smaller companies are going into that space because they can also get the funding. So it's a bit of a kind of never-ending circle per se. But the way I'd look at it is you really want to try to make sure, if you're in those sorts of spaces, make sure you're doing something that's significantly different.
Yeah. So just to thread through, I mean, I don't know whether Jim Thurlow's here. Jim, are you anywhere in the room? Just Jim, just this idea. I mean, we've had it many times of almost with the technology you've got. How do we package it up so it looks like the herd mentality? so just to thread it through the group.
Well, you can't really do that if you're like everybody else. The investors want you to be similar to everybody else, but different enough to make you special. Sorry. And I think that the real challenge that we have is you can't take a truly disruptive technology at a very early stage anymore and put it through, because investors quite rightly look to say, I'm not going to get into anything I don't know the way out of. Yeah. And by its very nature, things that are disruptive don't always have a direct route to exit. And I think that's a challenge, and maybe the group should talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So just back to Tauhid, what's your view on that?
So I think there is safety in the herd mentality, and I think that is one of the causal effects of what we observe. I tell my team that what we're doing in the model that we're pursuing, we are pioneers, but then I'm reminded in the Westerns, the pioneers all got shot, didn't survive, and it was the settlers that came across. But I think our industry definitely needs pioneers. I'm reminded of a quotation from John Maynard Keynes, an economist from the last century. He said, his observation in business was that it's better for reputation to fail conventionally than to succeed unconventionally. So things haven't really, it seems, moved far from that observation. And in part what causes that is I think that our investment community are looking for shorter term gains. The business we are in is risky, it's costly, and it takes time. And we need to shift that mindset regarding investment in the kind of things that we do to a much longer term platform. And I observe in the US in particular, there are approaches to that. There is MIT have created, for example, a patient fund, and I don't mean as in patients, as in patience. In other words, giving innovators a longer platform, 2-3 years, in an incubator environment with funding to take that potential disruptive technology from their lab into the clinic. And these are, I think, some of the steps that we need to take and consider to move away from that herd-type mentality. Yeah? And then remember, the disruptions you're seeing in gene therapy, cell therapy, immuno-oncology, they didn't happen overnight. It takes a herd mentality, not just safety in numbers, but also it creates competition, so that I'm working in the rare disease space. I'm interested in gene therapy. I'm interested to advance the next wave of, caspids, promoters, and so forth. And I know that it's a very competitive field, and that makes me want to be more successful, take maybe a higher level of risk, and hopefully that will create new clusters of innovation, disruption, and take some of us away from our comfort zone and away from that herd mentality.
So, how do we stir this up? So, is our creativity oppressed by the system at the moment? I just ask the question that when I originally did biotech, the VCs used to say to people like me, what do we do? Now what they want to do is tell me what to do. They want me to be a perfect executor. So I sense there is a belief that there is the clever crowd who knows exactly what to put money in that sits at the top, and they do it because they've got better Excel spreadsheets than most. And then there are other people who go down the line who have got to execute it. Is that something, Renata? I'll pick on you. What do you think?
I think you're right, Tony. I think that...
Wait, we've got a mic coming.
No, I agree with what you're saying, Tony. I think the emphasis has moved from the clever people being the discovery people, etc., to the people in venture capital. And they're making decisions, as you say, based on various different value models that they can model, you know, the drug development pathway and all the money that's going to be realised and taking into account risks, and telling people what to do. And that's stifling creativity, stifling innovation, stifling looking at, you know, different development paradigms, because they want the return quickly.
Tony,
Phil.
as someone at the other end of the VC food chain, so to speak.
VC food chain.
Yeah. I'm not sure I agree, because I'm seeing a lot of VCs coming to me with an idea and saying, what does MSD think of this? If we get it to this point, would you buy it? And I'm always in two minds. No, I don't want to blinker you. I want you to be innovative. Be really innovative, and then we'll choose from that innovation. Don't do the same thing as we do as Pharma. So those guys are not predicting.
Yeah,
They don't have a master
Are you
spreadsheet.
not, Phil, part of the problem then? Because
Could well be.
because you are. They're coming to you and they're saying, you know, check out my idea that I'm going to then tell these people to do. That's what they're doing, aren't they? So I suppose my question to you is that the wrong end of the creative serendipity framework that's going to create true novelty, or not? I don't know. Give me my new friend over there.
Morning, Di Hayward. I think one of the things we heard yesterday, that one of the things the pharma industry doesn't do particularly well is learn from other sectors. It doesn't particularly innovate in the way that other sectors have. So let's cast our minds a long time ago to what IBM did and in the creation of the microcomputer as it was then. They set up a skunk works. They had the main business, but they then had the kind of Friday activity. Google do the same now. And I'm just very fearful, and I see this having interacted with the pharma industry as a supplier over many years. There's a point at which you can gain entry, but most of the time, particularly with a small, using your hate word for the morning, disruptive technology, it's difficult to break in because that creativity is not there, that risk-taking is not there, that ability to say, let's just do something on a Friday afternoon and have a go. That seems to have disappeared. And that's a huge shame because we did do a lot of that, I think, in this sector. And I think this sector could learn from going back to the past, if you like, by looking at the future in that way.
So Stuart, us bringing you in a sec, just this question about linear thinking. So you know, another thing I find intriguing really is that there is you know, everyone says, well, we're going to do a load of experiments, we're going to get a value inflection, and then Bob's your uncle, we're going to do really good stuff. Now, is that the way that research really, you know, there's lots of good retro stories that you could put in and say, that's what happened, but actually, does that really happen? Or is it always in the middle ground and it never quite is what is that? Stuart, what's your thought?
So I think there's a macroeconomic piece here, and I think the points that were made about getting to a stage and then cashing out. I mean, cash is cheap at the moment, so people want to invest in something and get something out. And I think, as Phil was saying, the concept of people getting something to a stage and getting it to a return perhaps actually forces them into a position where they go down a route which they think is a lower risk. It avoids your skunk works because people aren't going to put something in that they think is going to be a longer term bet. But also I think it then forces people into a single funnel to say you need a big boy to come and take your hands. And those people are acting as a filter. I think the concept around it is that, you know, if we take the economic piece out of it and think more about the innovation, what I really hope people were thinking about, whether it's in rare diseases or something else, that people are then thinking about, well, what's the unmet need that we're trying to address, rather than getting lost in the technology. And the point you made earlier I really liked is about, you know, pharma companies turned into bio companies, turning into cell therapy companies. And, you know, you didn't talk about, I'm sure in your mind, is genetics and digital. It's that convergence piece. So how do we take the best bits of all the various pieces and then say, how can they be greater than the sum of their parts? Because that, to me, says, well, if we can do that, that's where the real innovation comes, and work out what problem we're trying to solve.
That's a good point. And just one reflection, and then I'll bring in whoever I see, is that, you know, again, raising money. Jim and I have been trying to raise some money for some time. We're getting there, Jim, aren't we? But there's this encroachment of that mindset of software, which is also having an effect on the financing. In other words, there's a deep belief on the finances that you can turn around things, because a lot of them are doing digital, and they're saying to us, well, we really want to do AI, not because of the wet work, we want to do it because of the dry work, you know, the software, because we know we can do all these clever things in no time at all. So I think that's another big macro thought, but my friend here.
So thanks, Tony. I mean, so I think we've been doing a herding in the pharmaceutical industry for as long as I can remember. So in the early 90s, it was all high throughput screening, combi chemistry. Then early part of this century, it was all genetics. And then it was translational medicine and biomarkers. And then it was pre-competitive science. And we've all got a set up in Boston. And, you know, and now, of course, it's all AI and machine learning. So, but having said that, you know, if I look across the university sector, you know, they do herding as well. So let's not beat ourselves up too much. My concern going forward is that the choices facing us are just going up and up and up. You know, we've got so many targets to play with. We've got so many diseases and subsets of diseases to play with. We've got new lots of biomarkers. We've got new ways of stratifying patients. We've got lots of new modalities. So actually, increasingly, I think, a big organization, no matter how big they are, they just can't do this on their own. And they need that de-risking externally. And what I see happening more and more is that big pharma is working increasingly with smaller companies. So let me just illustrate that. Just 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting in London at the Royal Society. Many Panellists gets up and gives the first talk. He gave 5 examples of things that they were doing inside AZ. And each one was with a company. We're doing this antisense oligonucleotide with Ionis, this antibody with Bicycle Therapeutics, et cetera, et cetera. And I totally understand it from a pharma perspective that you would work with small companies because implicitly they've got some sort of proprietary platform or asset, and they think like industry, there's a goal and milestones, et cetera. So
But just taking that point, and then I'll ask Phil. I mean, I'm a both big company man and a small company man, and when I'm in a big company, I see it impossible when you're in there to see all this stuff that's turning up every day, and everybody always starts again, and they say, okay, now we're going to get a spreadsheet. There's always a spreadsheet. They come out and they say, we're going to have this spreadsheet. We're going to put this up the top, and then within a minute, spreadsheet's gone because 6 other things have come in. So there's a swamp phenomenon going on. There's a phenomenon that says they must be good because they're not us. There's a relax and control, so sometimes I really want to control it because I only trust myself, and then there's a relax because if I get people that are clever to help me, I can do it. So there's a whole load of stuff, but I ask you, Phil, over there, what's your thought as, you know, the stuff that enters into your in-tray, if you've got an in-tray, because you probably don't have one anymore. If you had an in-tray, you know, what stuff's turning up?
Yeah, so I just want to comment on the statement that Chaz made. I was actually going to say the same thing. You're much better qualified to say it, Chaz, that herding mentality actually happens right across our industry, in academia, the VC community, as we've talked about, biotech and pharma. But thankfully, in amongst that, there are innovators in each of those sectors. To your question, Tony, you're right. We see a lot of stuff. We see a lot of stuff, and we have some crude filters. We're looking for, like a lot of pharma say, super innovative, disruptive opportunities. We filter those out, and I'm not sure there's any other MSD people here, but the negotiation internally on something disruptive or innovative is almost as hard, if not harder sometimes, than the negotiation externally.
So my hypothesis to put forward, and then I'll bring in Tony, is that it's all about, the only way I can differentiate, and I did this for years, I looked at technology all over the place. The only way I could see whether something was better than worse was the quality of the person who told me the story in front of me. And that was often based on just, were they less confused? Were they able to tell it as a story? So I suppose, Tony, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I was just going to add to what Phil's saying. When you look at potentially disruptive or transformative things, when you're judging it, do you judge it, and this goes if you're a pharma or you're an employee or you're a VC, do you judge it based on the technology? Do you judge it based on the people? And I would...
Well, just to answer that, Tony, two things. One, it's the biology, it's the mechanism and how novel that is, and then it's the people. Right. Do we believe the story coming from, and I don't think it's the VC people, it's actually the scientists we want to hear from, but it's the quality of those people, the story they tell, how believable it is, and if we can work with them, because we do want partners, we need to be able to work with them.
So that's
the
really
people,
interesting. Yeah. To really, tell us more about working with them. Just I'm very interested. We have to work with them. So what's the phenotype of someone you can work with and somebody you can't work with?
There's of course many phenotypes, but if someone comes along and is exaggerating the story they're telling about the data that they've got, those sorts of things, then you start to think, I don't believe this story, I don't believe the person that's telling the story. It's that sort of, it's normal people skills. And then of course when you go into partnership, there's the mutual respect piece. Yeah. We've got something to bring, you've got something to bring, we value what each other brings, and we see benefit from working. We'll produce more working together than doing it separately.
Just before I get on to Tony, Tauhid, you used the word biotech mentality, I think. Is that what I'd like is just you to say something on that, and maybe someone from a biotech to just spar with you a bit on what that is.
Well, for me, biotech mentality means you turn up to work wearing jeans, I guess.
So jeans is the
jeans,
key.
yeah.
On, so we're okay. Yeah.
No, look, I think the word is agility, and I've observed. So I'll tell a story. One of the models that we pursue is, in my team, we say, we're going to create new companies. We're going to work with venture capital firms to do that. We then put some of our people into that new company, and we say, go and spend a year there, and then come back into Takeda and contaminate us with that enthusiasm of what works well in biotech. In observing that, what seems to happen is decision making is much, much faster. There is not the levels of governance and committees, and we're all in pharma trying to address that. Second is collaboration with the outside world, and we're all trying to do that, is much more natural. Access to these new technologies, to venture capital networking, I see all of that happening on a daily basis. Yeah, it's just a natural environment that they all work in.
So just asking someone who's in biotech? My friend. My friend, yeah.
That's great, thank you. So coming from big pharma to small biotech, the collaborative phase is very natural because we haven't got the money to buy the kit or the skills that we would just sort of turn to a lab next door in the big pharma. We have to find somebody else to partner with.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, we give people access to our scientists, to our platforms when we have a collaboration with a smaller company. It's very much, the CMSO of Takeda says they win, we win, and that's the kind of philosophy that we're really trying to promote in this new model of open innovation and collaboration.
So just to keep us going, so we're saying that there's always been a herd mentality, so that's fine. We're saying that there is maybe some oppressed creativity, but I'm not really sure. Someone from an incubator who works with startups, Miranda at the back, what do you think?
I think the biotechs have creativity. I think they are risk takers, and I think they persevere, and it's damn hard work. So
let's just think of Tony and the future. So we're now looking, as we enter 2019, to me, in the words of David Bowie, it's a big glob of stuff. You know, there's a big glob of stuff out there. So what, and then we've got, you know, everything I buy turns up in a box from Amazon. I wake up in the morning talking to this person called Alexa, who I'm very fond of. What's going to happen to our world? You know, what is serendipity going to be replaced by computers? Are we going to get chemistry sent to us in a box by a drone? What's going to happen, man? And transformation is your thing. So
Transformation's my thing. So what's going to happen? You know, I think that as we look at what we're doing, and I think this applies to all people, if you get so focused on what you're having to do day in, day out, you know, being able to have some time to step back and just think about stuff, I think is where a lot of the creativity comes from. And you know, the concern moving forward is people get so programmed with what's on their iPhone, what's next, etc., that they're not taking the time to talk to people, particularly people in adjacent fields, because you obviously know what's going on in your own field, but it's those adjacencies where I think there's a real potential in the next, you know, 5, 10, 15 years to make, you know, transformational leaps.
So those who's in Pharma? Is anyone in Pharma, or have you all left Pharma? I've got one. I got a red person at the back. So you know, is Pharma ready to go and spend some time with Nike or with I don't know, Costa Coffee, getting new ideas on value chains and on just in time and all that jazz?
Yeah, I actually believe they do. I mean, I work for Genentech, which is in the Bay Area in California, so we do quite a lot with the different companies in Silicon Valley, looking at how they work and getting ideas from them. We do different programs where we actually exchange employees for different learning for both sides. We even share a bus with Google. But yes, I think we are ready to definitely embrace other areas for what they bring to pharma.
So just tell it, because that's sharing a bus always sounds great. So you know, I suppose the question is I don't see much of that going on in Europe, but is there something about the ecosystem of where you sit that it's a lot more? I think you called it jeans. Who said jeans? You said, you know, it's a lot more jeans and skateboards. Is there something about that sort of thing that is that we're missing? Is it that it's just not very easy to put two things together which appear so different to catalyze something to come together? Thoughts?
I mean, I can't really talk so much from the European perspective, but it doesn't seem that difficult, putting two completely different worlds together and learning from each other.
Okay, great. I got a hand waving then.
Hi, Nicola Clear from Pfizer in the UK. Just to give you an example, we had McLaren down to our site a couple of weeks ago, gave us an excellent stimulating talk on how they use artificial intelligence, big data. Really, you know, totally different industry, but we had 100 people there. We opened it up to all the industries on the site, and it was, you know, really stimulating. And just a great example of how I think pharma are opening their doors to look at other industries and how we can learn from their approaches.
So was there anything practical came out of that?
Well, it was only a couple of weeks ago, but it's not the start. You know, we have been on a journey, but I think there is more recognition that we can learn from others, both culturally, socially, and from a technical perspective.
Okay,
there's a much lauded story about McLaren and GSK actually about their inhaler technology, about using telemetry, and also in things as diverse as toothpaste manufacturing, which they learned from how they approach pit stops. So I know it's not quite the same in terms of the innovation at the front end, but in terms of the back end, I think that kind of mindset and mentality is there. But I think, as our colleague says, it's a bit pocketed where people go and reach out, rather than it being more of a prevalent mentality.
About our, structured thinking. I'm a Roche man through and through, really, and so every time I look at a problem, I look through the eyes of how I was trained, and I was really trained hard that this is the way you do it, Tony. So is there something about it's hard for companies to move because we don't do things like that? That's not the way we do it.
I think it comes to this partnership piece, and I think fit is really important, but it's a pro and a con, because if you're looking for people that fit, it's within your mindset already, rather than saying, should we be embracing people who don't fit, who are actually going to do something differently. And the partnerships that I've worked in, some have been really successful and some have just failed abysmally. And the ones that have failed abysmally have been the ones where people have not been able to walk around and understand what the other person is trying to do. And the ones that have worked is where people have said, I recognise the diversity. So it's like Tauhid was saying. It's you're not trying to force fit them into the governance model. But on the other side, if you're the small biotech working with Takeda, you've also got to recognise if you're killing patients, you're not going to go very far.
Unlike Takeda.
I wasn't suggesting you were, sorry. It was a hypothetical.
So Tauhid, are you going to do a strategic relationship with Levi's?
Maybe after this, but we do have collaborations going on with a vast number of AI companies, and I'd love to get the audience's perspective on artificial intelligence. I've spent a long time in drug development, and I still haven't cracked the secret sauce for drug development. So when 42 companies in the last year that have approached me about artificial intelligence, I struggle to understand their language. I just fail to understand what is it that they're delivering, because to me it's all basically deep text mining is what they're doing. Yeah. So if we can get some ideas from examples of maybe how AI has benefited R&D, I'd be really grateful to kind of learn from your experiences of that.
So let's throw it out. AI, where is it in the pharma world? My God, we've got not a single person.
And I say that because it's like, 20, 30-year-olds from the Bay Area that contact me. They've just graduated from Stanford and they've come up with an algorithm,
Just and then I've got some hands coming. But, to me, that I keep thinking of roll up. I've got this magic potion and I can sell it to you because it cures all known disease. That box of AI feels like that, but maybe comments. Let's just ask the young lady over here first, because
Well, thanks a lot. I think like anything, we have been working on AI. Now it's called AI. A few years ago, we were calling it systems biology. And we have been working on building mathematical algorithms to actually identify new spots for drug discovery, but also for drug development. And we have been doing that in collaborations already for a few years. And now I think the scale of it, it's fascinating. So there is a scope to do more for sure. But I think the fact that industry is not working on it, I find it hard to believe, because we have been working on it and there are very tangible evidence on that in publications. And clearly we have been pioneering some of it with the universities, for instance, in Belgium, in KU Leuven. We just recently did a very nice stratification based on AI, looking at patients' data, but also genetic profiling, microbiome, etc. And we have identified patients that are actually at risk, but also more importantly, what treatment benefits they can take on that. And it's all in the public domain. So pharma's doing something. Is it at the scale that we get the publicity for? Not. Can we do more? Absolutely, we can do more. But I think like anything else, we approach innovation, experimenting with it first, knowing its value, and then I think we'll do more.
Just a quick comment. I don't think we should be beating ourselves up, and this is all happening in the Bay Area. We've just done a global review of AI machine learning companies in the drug discovery space. 3 of the top 5 are in the UK or Europe. We're doing this stuff here.
What are the 3?
So a couple of Oxford companies, Exscientia, Therapeutics, Benevolent, Ictos in France. Just as examples
I get
of.
it, but you know, I think the battle part. I have this battle. You know, as a biologist, I'm used to pipetting and cells on one end, and then on the other, I've got computers. So what I'm really trying to understand is how those two things merge, and what I see is a lot of. I can get reprofiling with AI. I sort of can get that because it's, you know, it's like going into data rooms, isn't it? Really. But I think this question about how do you fuse it to the wet work? How do you fuse prediction to wet work? Tony, transformation man.
Yeah. So again, I think it's a field that's evolving very rapidly, and I think, you know, to Phil's point, I think, you know, there are folks who are leading the way. But I think most people just don't know enough to know what's good and versus what's bad. And I think there's a bit of an education piece that needs to happen to all of the scientists who, as to what this could actually benefit. And I think that's where, being scientists, people are going to want to see concrete examples,
So
not necessarily retrospective studies, but prospective
Right, I
studies.
think that's a really good point. Let me just ask. I want to ask Nigel Blackburn. You know, I suppose, do you know your name, man? But one of the key, one of my interests is, so I get AI down the front end, right? But then I'm still, one day you've still got to find a human being and you've got to administer it. In the last 5 years, what's happened to clinical trials that's front edge? And are we approaching our introduction of new ideas into humans in a different way?
Not the basic introduction, no. I mean, you've got to do a phase 1 in the way you've got to do a phase 1, and there are small incremental gains around that in the way you calculate starting doses and your dose scheduling and all that kind of thing. But fundamentally, you've got to go stepwise when you go into man for the first time. I think the real promise in technology, and I don't know, you just call this AI or just big data, but what most excites me at the moment is synthetic control arms is you know, one term that's used, but it's this ability to run much smaller trials and generate your control data through huge data sets that exist. The likes of Flatiron that I know Roche have bought, big data management company like Medidata we work with, for instance, they've got vast amounts of data because they work with 50% of the big pharma.
So what would you be able to, what's going to be the gain of all that technology?
You don't have to run a control arm. You generate it synthetically from your database. And that's going to bring massive benefits in terms of speed of development and cost of development. So for me, that's a real tangible thing that's actually happening right now.
Right.
You can generate your control data synthetically from data sets that exist and not have to run your control arm. I don't know if you call that AI or you call that big data, what do you want to call it, I don't mind. But for me, that's what excites me going forward. I think that's going to be a massive benefit in clinical development. Yeah.
So, and how does that work? Is that the same for cell therapy and all those sort of?
Wherever you have to generate control data, absolutely, yeah.
So thanks, Nigel. So going back to the panel, so Tauhid, tell us more about your ideas of your incubator ideas and what, because you look like you're trying to do something different.
So again, it's focused around rare diseases, and it's trying to create value not just in our pipeline, but to access potentially interesting therapies in our ecosystem and beyond. The model is simply that we take a small team and we run a virtual development or translational and early clinical development team. So we're saying you don't need to have these large global project teams. You can have a small team of 4, and then you go out and you seek the experts in the outside world, or you buy them in. We give the team a finite amount of capital and a runway of 18 months to maybe 24 months. And we say, build a package of data that gives you a reason to believe. We're not looking to do the bells and whistles. It's like the kill experiments as quickly as possible. We try and use the most relevant technologies, because I'm sure many pharmacologists get fed up in the lab of curing mice, so we're trying to look at other things that we can do. So, you know, there are 3D structures, organoids, so we use those, induced pluripotent stem cells, just to give you a flavour of the cluster or constellation of experiments that we will do to build that data package. And then the next phase of that is we then go to an internal review, and it's a review not by the usual suspects within the pharma organisation, but we create it almost like a VC board, and saying, here's what we've done, here's the data we have, this is the reason to believe, this is a roadmap moving it forward to the next larger inflection point, would you invest in it? So we don't ask, will you buy it, we ask, will you invest in it?
Can I just ask you a question? So are you getting the people you need to have that agility of mind?
So the team that I have are people that were at Takeda and came from big pharma, and one of the things that, you know, we spend a lot of time doing is exposing them to the outside world. Yeah. Now I know every pharma company is going to tell you we collaborate, we go outside, but I think that's a trend that's beginning to garner pace. You know, with open innovation models, creation of incubators, accelerators, and so forth. So it's a journey that we've been on, and yes, definitely, and I gave the example of we're putting our people into these spin-out companies and mixing them with serial entrepreneurs and saying, come back. Yeah.
So I think the young lady's going to get, 10 minutes. My goodness. Can I just spend the next 10 minutes with you all, just this thing about people, and are we delivering, getting the right people? You know, one of my, I think what we want of people is different to what it was. I think, are the universities training them? Ruth, you're from Swansea. Maybe one comment from Ruth about, what do you think about the way we're training our students, the postdocs? I'm horrified by the way that they present their data, really, and I come from Swansea as well. But what's your thoughts about training?
I think it's really important that when we're bringing people through that they get the right lab experience, but also the real world experience in commercial places as well, because otherwise what you end up with is students who are academically really, really clever, they're good at their research, but they don't have that agility, and they don't necessarily have the pace to be able to make that jump into the commercial world and really make the best value out of that time, I think.
So is there a real gap between what their awareness is of what we want in industry with what they get trained in?
I think in some areas, yes. And this is where I think you see a lot more sandwich courses, year in industry. Those kind of placements become really, really important.
Yeah. So just back to you guys. I mean, are you getting, Phil, well, you're getting what you need?
I was just going to add to your comment. I sit on an MRC panel that's called Proximity to Discovery, which is focused on principally exchange between industry and academia. And it is surprising to see how much naivety there is on each side when you see the proposals that come in, but also the benefit that comes out of a mid-career scientist in a university coming into pharma. Actually, these guys do know a bit about what they're doing, and pharma folk going into academic centres. It's small, it's a very small amount of money from MRC, but it is a mechanism to try to get exchange going.
Yeah. What's your thought, Tim?
Yeah, so I think, in terms of training, I mean, we don't hire the same number of people that kind of MSD do, but we've hired probably 30 people over the last 12 months, and I think a good proportion come from the academic world. I think, the thing, you often see very good on the content, but particularly from a biotech perspective, it's a question of being flexible and looking at the data and maybe having to change course. And so I think it's not so much the content, but having people of the mindset of, trying to find a drug hunting as opposed to doing kind of research. And so you're always trying to find the way through. Yeah. And that's the thing that a lot of folks from the academic world might not have been exposed to.
So just in the audience, have we got the people we want for the next for the Google times?
So, I mean, I think the pharmaceutical industry has always wanted, does today, and it will tomorrow. They want de-risked targets, de-risked assets, de-risked biomarkers, de-risked ways of stratifying patients. All these technologies, Tony, we've been talking about, be they translational medicine or genetics or now AI, they're all aimed at delivering those de-risked things. Yeah. Now, to me, I think the best way to get these de-risked things is, I think we need creative entrepreneurs like Tony, and we need to pull back some of these people from the US. Secondly, I think we need long-term funding. I mentioned Ionis at the start. That company's been going for 25 years on the West Coast. Now they've de-risked that technology. Mm-hmm. That's what pharma wants. And so in the UK, I think we need more entrepreneurs and more of this long-term funding to allow small companies to de-risk these platforms or targets or whatever.
So maybe we want de-risk people as well. You know, people who.
You know. Sure we do.
So say something. Come on.
Well, I'm not sure we want de-risk people actually, because I think you run the risk. You get people into companies, they homogenise, they get lost in the process. So actually, the ones you want are the people who can answer the question, so what? So what are we doing? What's the impact? But also, I think those people who can then understand the sensitivity of what they're doing. So if something then changes, what's the impact? And is it the major driver that's going to kill or allow it to promote? And answering those right questions very early. So I think we do want people who have a sense of risk, but the last thing you want is people who are going to just be vanilla, because otherwise I think you go to the lowest common denominator.
Now, I'm mindful of time, guys. I want you just to finish with one word to describe how it's going to be in the next 5 years in your job.
Fast-paced.
I think London is going to be the new Boston.
Man, that's cool, isn't it?
So one word.
And I'll see you on the way to Levi's. Yeah.
Convergent.
Convergent. Phil?
Continued innovation.
Yeah. Well, it's been fabulous having such a cool group of people to talk to, and thank you very much.
Thank you.